All right, so as I mentioned earlier this week, I'm presenting the results of this short crowdsourced study on the probability of being on the player spending and their correlation in Magic the Gathering Arena Best of One Ranked. So this is part of the Death by Variance video lecture series. So I'm Mark, and welcome to this presentation. So we know that being on the play is very important in a game of Magic. If you're on the play, you automatically have an advantage, at least in any format other than limited, right? Where there are situations, there are decks where you may want to go on the draw. But in any other game of Magic, you do always want to be on the play. And of course, we know that going on the play is a random variable. And if it was on paper, then we'd be tossing a coin or a die in order to identify who will go first. Of course, online, that is simulated by an algorithm, a very simple coin tossing algorithm, to determine who will go first. However, there are a lot of controversies that surround the idea of how likely it is that you are going to go first in a game of Magic when it's online or when it's on MTGA. Right. So just as some examples, you can see some examples here. So for example, here, well, this one just says that MTGA is rigged. I don't think that it specifically pertains to the algorithm going first, but we also have, oops. So that, okay, but here we have game is rigged, and you could see statement here. So 75% of the time, opponent starting. I guess that means that the opponent starts 75% of the time. We have more. So this is actually specifically on who goes first. You can see I've actually noticed you go on second way more after winning a few games in a row. Actually, so this person did a test and he went. He only went first 30% of the time, and so on and so forth. So this person only went 30 to 35% of the time, not even close to 50-50. And we have one more. And this are not just some random comments online. You can also have a comment from streamers or personalities, sort of. Desolator, I guess, is a personality in Magic. So here we have this 31-minute video, and at some point he does say that the Wizards definitely rigs who goes first in MTGA. And these are not unpopular opinions. As you can see, these are not unpopular opinions. 86% upvoted, 29% upvoted. This had 26,000 views, 685 likes. So as you can see, it's not an uncommon or even very unpopular to think that the coin tosser is somehow rigged. When I say coin tosser, it's the one that determines whether you're going to go on the play or go on the draw. So that's one reason why, or that's the main reason why we're doing this, because we want to shed actual data-based light on this phenomenon. Is there, so although this is a not a very small study, although this isn't a very comprehensive study, it does attempt to shed light on whether there is some truth to that theory. And so our objectives are as follows: to estimate the probability of going on the play, all right, to estimate the proportion of people who spend money on Magic Arena and the median spending, and to examine the correlation between these two. That is there a relationship between the rate at which you go on the play and the money that you've actually spent in the game. Okay, so how did we come up with these results? So this is based on crowdsourced data. So I'd like to thank everyone who has supported data gathering for this presentation. And this isn't the first time that many of you contributed data. I'm very glad and very thankful for that, for supporting what we want to do for the death by variance page, which is, like I said, to shed light on these theories and see how much actual data can back up these ideas. All right, so for each of the participants, they played at least 15 matches, all in best of 1 ranked, and then they reported the number of games that they played. So I said that at least 15 matches. Some of them played a lot more. Some of them provided data from their tracker, which is a lot more, like 100, not 100, but I think at least some of them reported hundreds of games from trackers. So number of games that they went on the play, and then the amount of money that they have spent so far. So overall, we have 46 participants. Most of these are from the Facebook post that I made, but I was also able to gather some additional participants from Reddit, and I also put in my own data, which I've actually streamed. So my data, you can see that being recorded live in one of the videos on my page. And so out of 46 participants, we have 2,074 games played. So that's not few, right? So that's a lot of games, and should be enough for us to get a good estimate on what the proportion of going on the play is. All right, so let's move on. So estimating the probability of going on the play, we do it 2 ways, right? The first way, and I'll explain what is different between these 2 ways. So the first setting is we assume that each game is independent. All right, so this is sort of a reasonable assumption when you consider that all of us are using the same software, right? When we play a game, all of us go online using the same client, and it's the same client that gives us the result on whether we go on the play or on the draw. So even if all of the games that are played, all of those 2,074 games were played by a single individual, it shouldn't matter, right? So that's the prevailing assumption for setting 1, and we'll see whether or not that's very reasonable when we look at the results. All right, so if that's our assumption, then it's very easy to estimate. The probability of going on the play is just the total number of games on the play from among those 2,074 games divided by 2,074. And out of all of those games, 988 were played with the participant on the play, and that gives us an estimate of 0.4764. So about 47.64% of the time, a player was on the play based on our data. Now we can construct a 95% confidence interval for that. If you want to learn more about what a confidence interval is, I explained this in detail in another video, also on the page, on the channel, the YouTube channel. But I'll give a brief description. So we can say that that we are 95% confident. We're 95% confident that the probability that a person goes on the play is in between these 2 numbers. So it's no more than 49.79% and no less than 45.49%. Now it's a bit interesting that even with such a large sample size here, we are essentially saying that the probability of going on the play is less than 50%, right? Which is what is being attributed, right? It's less than 50%, and we can say that it's in between these 2 numbers. But really, since we're talking about 49.79%, that's still close to 50%. Nonetheless, if we are strictly speaking about whether or not there's enough statistical confidence to say that the probability of going on the play is less than 50%, that seems to be what this is saying. All right, but before we raise our pitchforks and go to WotC with these results. Note that, of course, statistics like Magic is not a game of gotcha, where whoa, we have a significant result. We have to like put all our eggs in this particular result. No, we have to look at other things. We have to look at the distribution of the data. Okay, so but is it possible for there to be some sort of rigging given that we have this result? Well, if you consider the plot of the rate of going first, so this is the rate that you go first, so that's 10.1 to 0.9, right? And this is number of games played. Number of games played, then it should be that if you're only playing 15 games, right? If you're only playing 15 games, as many of the people who contributed did, so the rate at which you're going to go first is going to go all over the place. Some people will go 50% of the time, like 7 out of 15, so here, or 8 out of 15, so here. Okay, but some people will also go on the play 80% of the time, and some people will go on the play 10% of the time, right? But if there are people who are going on the play more often than they should be, then as they play more games, that's going to manifest. So as they play more games, so let's say they play 500 games, and they really go on the play 90% of the time. So you're going to see those people here. On the other hand, if many of us going on are supposed to have rates of going on the play that are less than 50%, then if we play more games, that's also going to manifest. So a lot of us will be over here. So you're going to see a distribution like this. Right, where you see a lot of people that are going on the play fewer times than 50%, even as the number of games that they play increase, and there are a small chunk of people who are going on the play a lot more times than they should be. So it's like they're getting that probability. The reason why they can do this is because they're getting from these people. So if we see something like this in the distribution, then there is cause to worry. So let's see what the distribution holds. So this is the actual distribution of the data. Each data point here is one participant. Okay, and that's why, as you can see here, there are a few participants who contributed a lot of games. So this participant contributed more than 450 games from a tracker. This person contributed more than 400 games, also from a tracker. And then we also have people here, right, who contributed a lot more than 15 games. So we don't see what I was talking about if there was some sort of rigging. Instead, we see what's expected. We see that these numbers, if you are one of these people who are playing just 15 games, you can have very extreme results on either end. You can have very extreme results on either end. And this fuels the emotion that we see often on posts saying that, oh, I went on the draw 10 out of 15 times. And that can actually happen, as you can see here. That can actually happen. But that does not mean that there's any sort of rigging. Because as you can see here, the more games you play, the closer your estimate comes to the middle. And some people, even if they've played more than 400 games, it's going to turn out that the proportion of times that they went on the play here is greater than 50%. But there are also people here who will turn out to have a proportion of going on the play that is less than 50%. Sorry, greater than 50%, less than 50%. Yeah. Less than 50%. Why is that so? Well, part of the reason why that's so is because the times that you play a match, each match that you play, in terms of whether or not you go first, is independent of the previous matches. And so since they're independent, the proportion that you go on the play, adjusted with your next match, does not care about the previous matches. Which means that suppose you are one of these people who at the very beginning were able to go on the play, say, 11 times out of 15. So the fact that you went 11 times on the play out of 15 does not impact whether or not you're going to go on the play or on the draw on your 16th match. And so it's like you already have this buffer. And so when you try to estimate the proportion that you are on the play later on, you have to overcome this buffer. So it means that you have to play a lot more than just another 11 games to see the law of large numbers kick in. You have to play a lot more in order for this initial streak to be buried by more data. So that's why we can see that even if we have very large number of games, we still see people whose probability of going on the play is larger than 50%, or people whose probability of going on the play is less than 50%. Okay. Okay, how about, so if we're using this data, and we're trying to discount the fact that these people played a lot more games than the other people, how would we do that? Well, that's setting number 2. We assume that each participant is independent, but that not each game is independent. So that means that we're saying that we want each participant to only have one weight in producing the data, which is different here because when we combine them all together, these participants here have a lot more weight in the result because they played a lot more games. Now, if we remove that and we give everyone the same weight, so then we can estimate just by taking the average of individual rates going first. That is, if we get all of these numbers, these data points in blue, if we take the average of those numbers in blue with respect to the x-axis, then that is going to be our estimate. And if we do that, our estimate actually becomes smaller. It becomes 46.56% from 47% from the previous one. But our confidence interval now includes 50%. Because we have fewer sample size. Instead of 2,000, we now have only a sample size of 46. So that widens our confidence interval. And so here, if we want to test if the probability of being on the play is different from 50%, we can no longer say that we are confident that it's different from 50% at a 95% confidence level. So here we don't have any evidence that going on the play is less than, has a probability of less than 50%. Although the actual estimate is still less than 50%. Okay? But it's not so glaringly so that it's a cause for concern. All right, so that is our estimation of the probability of going on the play. So now let's go to what I think is the most interesting part of this this experiment. So I set out to do an experiment correlating the probability of going on the play with the amount of money spent on Magic Arena. But I didn't think that such a conspiracy exists that would affect the probability of going on the play, and it doesn't seem like there is. But what was very surprising to me was this result on the amount of money that people spend on Magic Arena. Out of the 46 participants, 31 or 67.39% spent more than $0 on MTGA. That means that they've spent at least some money, 31 out of 46. So that's 67% of the people who participated in the study. Now, loosely speaking, if this sample that I collected can be considered as representative of the population. Of course, that's a big if, right? Because the sample was not randomly selected, so we really can't make that inference. But let's assume that that's the case. If we assume that that's the case, okay. Although, like I said, big caveat there. Since we did not make this a random selection, then there really it's not reasonable for us to say that we can call that for those 46 participants as completely representative of the entire population. But just suppose just suppose we assume that they are, right? Just suppose we assume that they are. That means that we can estimate that no lower than 56% of people who play Magic the Gathering Arena have spent at least some money in the game. That's very interesting. This is the actual distribution. So the mode is still that people don't spend in the game. It's a free-to-play game, right? But it's very interesting that the lower bound is 56%. Because if you look at all the other free-to-play games, and if you look at studies being done on free-to-play games, the proportion of players who spend money in the game typically range from less than 1% to 6%. That's the typical proportion of players of free-to-play games that actually spend money in the game. So for Magic Arena, this is huge. So I would try to actually make this motivates me to make an actual bigger. Of course, of course, Wizards knows the truth here. I mean, they have the actual data, but we don't know what that data is. It's not published data. And of course, here the median spending is $17.50. If you take the median of all of these, of course, it's better to take the median than the mean here, since it will be obviously unduly affected by very large, very small numbers. So we take the median. But yeah, this is very interesting to me, and I would wonder how accurate, how close to the truth this estimate is. I mean, like I said, we can't really consider this a valid estimate because we didn't randomly select the 46 participants, but still, it's very interesting. Okay, so now that we have that, now that we have an estimate on the distribution of people who've spent money in Magic Arena, let's try to see if there's any correlation between this data and the proportion that they go on the play. And for that, we have this graph. So we're plotting the rate at which you go on the play and the money that you spent. and interestingly enough, we did find a slight correlation. We did find a slight correlation between these two variables, but that correlation is negative. So that correlation is negative, which means that according to the data that we gathered, the more you spend, the lower your chances of going on the play. Yeah, but the amount of money spent only accounts for 3% of the variability, or 3% of the variability of the rate at which you go on the play. And if we are looking at this plot, we can clearly see that there is no relationship, right? So for this particular, the only reason why we got a I think our R value here is negative 0.18, so that if you square that, that's 0.03. So the only reason why we got a slight negative correlation was because of this outlier that was pulling the trend line towards a noticeable negative slope. But if we remove this outlier, as we can see in this graph, so the correlation is still negative, but now it becomes much smaller. Instead of the money spending contributing to 3% of the variability of the rate of going on the play, we see here that the money spending, the money spent is only accounting for less than 0.5% of the variability, less than 0.5% of the variability of going on the play. So it means it's nothing, basically. This is basically saying that there's no relationship. And you can see that from the graph as well. You can see that from the graph as well. As you can see here, the people who spend nothing or close to nothing, some of them have very high rates of going on the play. Some of them have very low rates of going on the play. And if you go to the people who've spent a lot, who've spent a lot, some of them also have probabilities of going on the play that are higher than half, and some of them also have probabilities of going on the play that are lower than half. And so there really isn't a correlation between these two variables. We can't find a correlation between these two variables. And we are seeing that, in as far as the data is concerned, it seems very reasonable that the amount of money that you spend has nothing to do with you going on the play. All right. Okay, so those are the main results. And so our conclusions after this crowdsourced study is, number one, we do not have strong evidence that people go on the play less than 50% of the time. However, our estimate of the probability of going first is slightly less than 50%, as you see from the estimates. So you do want further estimation to ascertain how consistent this phenomenon is. Because like I said, statistics is not a game of gotcha. If you see something that is interesting in a statistical result, the correct move in moving forward would be to repeat the experiment and see if you can capture the same phenomenon. Okay, and when you've seen that this is so consistent, that's when you can make broader generalizations about these numbers. So the most interesting, in my opinion, is this: more than half of people who play MTGA have spent at least some money in the game, myself included. And the last conclusion, that there is no evidence to support that people who spend more money go on the play more often. Okay, and that's it. That's it for my presentation. It's quite short. So now I'm going to entertain questions, and then afterwards we're going to draw the two winners of 1,000 gem codes. I will also be giving out ICRs to the people who ask questions. All right. We have one question from Paige. I think deck archetype comes into play. I had very few first turns while playing my slow burn control decks, and I started playing aggro, and I'm going to go on the. That's an interesting input. That's not the first time I heard of it. There are other people who also said that if you're playing an aggro deck, you go on the play more often. So that would be an interesting thing to look into. True. Yeah. Now, with regard to that, anyone can actually do that. All you need to do is to keep track of how many times you go on the play with an aggro deck, and then keep track of how many times you go on the play using other decks. And you can actually compare those two proportions to see if they're different from each other. Of course, for that to be, it's difficult to do that from a crowdsourced setting, because then I'd have to ask everyone to play the same deck list, and I don't think that's going to be feasible from a crowdsourced perspective. But if you're interested in knowing whether that is true or not, whether there is something there, it should only take about 50 or so games of playing the same aggro deck list. And of course, taking note of the opponents that you go up against. So you also have to take note of whether you're going up against other aggro decks or non-aggro decks, right? So you want to take that into consideration, so we can include that in the analysis. I'll be happy to do the analysis for that if you can gather the data. Okay, next. What would be the incentive to rig the ratio of going on the play or on the draw? I don't know. So like I said, some people have brought up the possible reasons why. Some people say that it's a way for. Let me be clear that I don't believe that there is that I don't believe in the conspiracy, right? And this presentation has shown that there is no reason to believe in that conspiracy. I think, all right. But some people have put forward the idea that it's a way to get players frustrated, so they're going to spend money in the game. But as you can see here, in as far as our data is concerned, the more money you spend, you have a slightly lower probability of going on the play. So that's not even supported by the data. I mean, that direction is not even supported by the data. So even if we say that fewer people, or even if we say that our estimate of going on the play is less than 50%, we are also seeing that the people who benefit least from that are those who've spent a lot of money. So it's really not reasonable to think that there is such a conspiracy theory, or that it's really not reasonable to believe in that conspiracy theory. All right, so that's it for this presentation of the Death by Variance lecture series. This is the second episode where we went live to present these outcomes. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and we'll do some more. Yeah. All right, so that's it for me today, and I'll see you again next time.